start my question answer in the case that I may say certain inappropriate words.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
We from side opening opposition believe that academizing hip-hop will only disempower the African American community, and that shouldn't happen, and that shouldn't be the case. I have this is what I'm going to do in my speech. I'll go on to my rebuttals, and then I'll move on to my argument. First rebuttal. Coming out from side opening opposition, so the Prime Minister said that these African Americans are locked out and as hip-hop culture is being locked out. This is totally underanalyzed. What do you mean by it's being locked out? There are people like Kendrick Lamar, people like Jay-Z and Kanye West who are being who are being celebrated, who are being celebrated by all these people. So this is underanalyzed, and it didn't really point out how these people are actually locked out, or how African Americans and hip-hop is actually locked out. So moving on to my my argument. So my first argument is how academizing hip-hop would disempower the African American community. So currently in status quo, it is easier to call out cultural appropriation towards the Black identity, because now people can't use academics as a reason for this cultural appropriation. Now when you academize hip-hop, it's difficult for you to call out a white person for hijacking or for taking away this Black identity from these African Americans. Now generally in status quo, white people get more access. White people get an unfair social attention compared to African Americans. So now you academizing this, academizing hip hop, you are giving more attention towards the white people, and you're hijacking that from the African Americans. When you academize hip hop, just white people who are interested, white people who are good at hip hop will tend to get more job opportunities, because currently in status quo, they're already getting more job opportunities. When you take a Black identity away from these people and you're like giving it to these privileged white people, they're already going to get even more job opportunities. So like these job opportunities that this African American could have got, you're now taking away and you're hijacking that away from them. And then discrimination. I want to talk about discrimination. See, discrimination is something that could only be resolved in the short run. I mean, they cannot be resolved in the short run, but can only be resolved in the long run through state intervention. When you academize hip-hop, you remove the short-run economic outlet for these African Americans, because now this African American identity has been hijacked by the state. The state, which is the very reason, the person who is responsible for all these injustice towards these African Americans, is the state who fails to reconcile that these individuals, the state who also remove this economic identity from these people. So the moment you academize hip-hop, the moment the state academizes hip-hop, you're then removing the short-run economic outlet for these African Americans.
Yeah. I think there's a difference between state facilitated and state controlled. I think my policy was really clear to tell you we have an African American council who has understanding of hip-hop, who will decide all these things.
Yeah, but still, you're going to be giving the opportunity to these white people to hijack the opportunities from these Black people. These Black people already in society are already having already not getting these opportunities. For example, if for every 10 white people who get a job opportunity, one Black person has to work even harder to get that job opportunity. So like this person's already competing so hard for this job opportunity because it's being hijacked and taken away by this white person. So imagine that now that this African American, take a seat. Now imagine now that this African American wouldn't be given any form of opportunity because the only thing that ties them to their culture is being also ripped away from them. So now, the hip hop struggles to attract the hip hop. Sorry. Now, for example, if this white person performs hip hop better than this African American, this white person, as I said earlier, are going to get these job opportunities, and this African American is going to lose out. And in general, African American have minimal opportunities because they are poor, they lack access, because they are stereotyped. People think they're not trustable. People think they are dangerous. So they are already sit down. They're already not having all these opportunities. So like the moment you incorporate, the moment you allow that these white people to take over their jobs, what are they going to do? They're going to go into gangs. They're going to go into violence. So now they're going to have to resort to all these other forms of activities because now you're going to steal hip hop away from them. So what are the outcomes? Sit down. What are the outcomes? Firstly, white people would monetize hip hop. They would monetize hip hop with better skill sets because now they would use academics as an excuse for cultural appropriation. Now it will be difficult for people to call out this white people when they culturally appropriate the black culture. Secondly, there'll be less African Americans in the hip hop industry because now there are very few privileged hip hop people like Kanye and Jay-Z. This debate is not about those people who are privileged. This debate is about those people who are struggling, those people who are underprivileged. This debate is about African Americans who probably don't do so well in academics, African Americans who are underprivileged, who come from these broken families, who cannot escape this society. But the only way they can escape this is through singing. Singing is their only outlet. Hip hop is their only outlet to escape from this. So you ripping this opportunity away from them, what are they going to do? They're not going to resort to all these dangerous things that they can't. They'll put them even more in trouble. So, and this will also, thirdly, this will also anger the, no thank you. This will also anger the African American community because now this black identity is being hijacked. Now the state, as I said earlier, the state is responsible for all this injustice with African Americans. So now that the state is, the state is now trying to implement this into the academics, they are failing to reconcile the fact that they're trying to reconcile these individuals, and the African American community is going to be even more angry because now their brothers, their sons, their nephews are not going to get these opportunities. Their sisters are not going to get these opportunities because all you white people are going to be stealing it away from them. So, because you're going to remove the only form of economic outlet that these people have, because hip hop is their culture. Hip hop is this black identity. So we believe that you should not be stealing this away from them. You should just leave them and let them. You should just leave them and let them flourish in their own industry and not hijack away from them. So with all that, I'm very happy to oppose.
I'd like to thank you all. Please now to call the EPM to finish the debate.
Do you consent?
Yes. Is everyone being recorded or not? Or the way for Harvard?
Is it going to turn it on?
Yeah, it's recording. Yeah.
We live in a world where black issues are not taken seriously. Systemic oppression is thought of as a myth. Police brutality is not taken seriously, and it is misread. Right? So before I move on into and delve deeper, we just want to clarify, right? So what is this debate about? We think that this debate is about the impacts of academizing hip hop on our future generation, right? So our burden of proof is very simple, right? We just have to prove that academizing hip hop has more benefits than harm towards the future generation, right? So our response to her case, right? A few rebuttals, right? She told us about how black artists are not locked out of this industry, right? But we tell you that to get into the music industry itself, it took far too long, right? The Academy Awards were biased towards white artists, right? They neglected hip-hop artists for far too long, right? This is why Jay-Z at one point in time had to boycott the Academy Awards, right? And consecutively boycotted it the next year, right? When they didn't credit hip hop artists, right? We didn't tell you that we think that because it took so long, we think that because black struggles and black issues are something that we need to talk about now, we think that it's very important for us to academize hip-hop, right, when they talk about black issues, right? So I want to talk about how less awareness apparently will come about cultural appropriation and how white people will hijack this narrative, right? We already told you, we already have it in our policy, right, about a black council where they manage and regulate who teaches this subject, right? And obviously, they won't give the job opportunity towards a white person who has never experienced black issues and black struggles, right? Obviously, it will be allocated towards African Americans who understand hip hop, right? So we think that other than that, right, we can even go further to say that we're creating more jobs for the black community, right? So we'll talk about how now then, because of the economic, and let's say that even if black people, like, you know, suddenly the economy goes to shit, right? We tell you it's already shit, right? The thing she's talking about, the harm that she's pushing about them joining gangs and whatnot, right? It is status quo, right? We're doing something about status quo. So I'll give you three arguments, right? First, the education on African American history and why we need this. Second of all, stopping cultural appropriation, which will be a direct response to hers. And third, traction from society, right? First of all, education on African American history, right? African Americans are a very unique group of people, right? They don't have a unified identity, or they don't have any identity tracing back to their roots because of slavery, right? They don't know where they're from. They just know that they're from this big continent called Africa. So hip hop is a specific culture and a unique culture that is unique towards their community specifically, right? We think that this is something very important to highlight, right? So when we include this in the academization, in the syllabus, right? This is when we bring light to people like Tupac Shakur, Notorious B.I.G., who bring about issues, right? This is when we stop cultural appropriation, right? When we recognize that hip hop is black culture and is part of the and belongs to the African community, right? So we think that when this happens, right, and it's easier to push for artists to stop culturally appropriating, right? We think artists are people who are very influential, and in status quo, they don't recognize this, right? They don't recognize that they are stealing from black culture and they're culturally appropriating. We have people like Iggy Azalea, who has no regard towards black culture and hip hop, right? We think that when we are able to establish, that black culture, that hip hop comes from black culture and is specific to the African American community, is when we get them to stop doing cultural appropriation, right? Now they will be forced to give back to the black community, right? And this will now become cultural appreciation versus cultural appropriation, right? When there's understanding about what it is, right? And when there's education about it, right? So now, education about it, right? When they're profiting millions, right? We think it's fine that they give some back to, like, for example, funds for the Black Lives Matter movement or any non-governmental organizations for black community, like scholarships specifically targeted towards this marginalized group, right? We think when this happens, this is when we're able to bridge the racial wealth gap in the marginalized community, right? We tell you, and further than that, right, we tell you why traction from these societies for these societies are important and why it will happen more so on the outside, right? Before that, sure.
Hip-hop is supposed to be a raw and uncensored voice for creators. The point in which you make it accessible, the point in which you constantly filter it for schools and universities, how do you retain hip-hop's identity?
I think you're putting words in our mouths. We never said to filter or censor anything, right? It might be regulated to a certain extent, as like blurring out explicit, like fuck or something like that, right? But we are not going to construe the whole, like, the issues that, like, this hip hop is that hip hop is talking about, right? We think that the whole reason behind us educating students about hip hop is to bring about awareness about police brutality, gang violence, right? About black on black crimes, right? Which they need to, which the black community should be educated about, right? They have the right to be educated about something that belongs, educated about their culture and their history, right? When it was taken away from them, when they were enslaved, right? So there are things like gentrification that are able to be brought to light, right? As Roshan already mentioned, things like "fuck the police," right, are describing police brutality in explicit terms, right? Why this white cop targeted me, and then his black colleague did not help me, right? These are the things that only hip hop, that only the hip hop industry highlights towards us, right? It brings about attention because hip hop is such an interesting thing. It brings about attention, and what does attention bring to people, right? It brings about awareness, right? Awareness about these issues, right? This is when people will start supporting the Black Lives Movement instead of condemning them and seeing them as a controversial movement, right? This is when we gain the social traction and political traction that we need for Black issues, right? When we push for better policies for Black struggles to be debated in Parliament, right? So this is when this is when we stop the courts from being impartial towards white cops, right? But in cases of police brutality, right, it's harder for them to escape things because now there's awareness about these issues, right? There's funding for these issues. People are lobbying for it. There's traction for these issues, right? So comparatively, under their side, everything that they're telling us is status quo, right? They are not giving us any harms or anything, right? Or anything, right? Even then, they have not proven to us why status quo is better, right? Comparatively, under our side, at least we have awareness and attention about Black struggle, about African American history, right? If you want to protect the most marginalized and most vulnerable group in America, please go with side opening up.
I thank the DPI for stage now to conclude the opening houses in the session.
Yeah, so government can't go softline in this debate. They have to defend to some degree a regulated, curricularized version of hip-hop, and there has to be some degree of control in order to gauge some objective metrics, which surprisingly is what comes when you academize a certain thing, right? So under their world, they won't have "fuck the police," apparently. Now they'll just have "the police" because they will cut out the "fuck," right? So I'll tell you why any degree of censoring of the hip-hop identity, which is an extension of the Black identity, is an attack on the Black identity in and of itself, and how you make it far worse for African Americans on their side, because all you'll have is white people stealing your jobs. Before I move in to the two things I'll posit to you in my speech, firstly, on how we empower minority opposition on our side, but next, I'll also run you through what it means to academize on our side, under our side, and I'll run you through the specific pragmatic harms of it. Before I move on to responses, firstly, on the Richard Nixon characterization that came out from opening government on how the state is actively clamping down on African Americans, right? I'm just going to use their examples for this because it pretty much tells you the trends in society right now, right? The fact that Jay-Z can campaign in status quo, the fact that Kanye West can go up on stage and say that Taylor Swift is taking Beyonce's position in and of itself implies some degree of organic change in status quo to ensure that African Americans get some degree of popularity, right? The problem with this policy is that it takes away these opportunities, it takes away the economic outlets from these African American individuals in America, much like how Tira talked about earlier, and we're not okay with that. That's the nuance, right? Also, this whole idea of how African Americans don't know what their culture is and don't have access to it, right? We read this characterization, we don't think this is true, right? Black individuals in America are the most unapologetically cultural individuals there is out there. Regardless how much there's been a clamp down on dreadlocks, regardless how much clamp down on rap and cursing in rap, they've been unapologetic. So when like the one corporation in America that chose to not hire that black woman because of her dreadlocks, there was massive campaign riots and protests in order to like reconcile this budget problem and to ensure that like social media attention was targeting this, right? Okay, so like the thing that we realize in this debate is that this debate is not about individuals like Kanye West and Jay-Z. It's about all the African Americans in between who don't get record labels, who who don't get signed with big labels and have to go from club to club and perform rap, perform hip-hop on the streets where they can get money, right? And this is exactly where you take away their opportunities. And lastly, on this idea of how they create more jobs and under their world, apparently, Iggy Azalea is going to be far more woke than she is right now, right? I'll tell you how. Under their side, Iggy Azalea is going to be far more complacent because now she has a degree to show that she's great in hip-hop and no other black person can, because a lot of people are locked out from education, locked out from academics, can't access universities with degrees that give you like hip-hop degrees in their world, while rich, white, privileged people have access to this. Two things I'll posit to you in my speech. Firstly, on how you hijack the black identity. Next, I'll run you through the harms and like what the job market is going to look like. What are the harms, how African Americans are going to be hit in the short run and the long run. Apparently I did not time myself. Okay, firstly, on the idea of hijacking black identity. So when you academize a certain subject, you have to apply certain metrics and you have to ensure that these metrics can be quantified to some degree, right? No, I'm timing, don't worry. So at least under our world, we allow African Americans to have uncensored versions of their hip hop and what it means to be black. Under their side, sure, they have their council making sure that individuals can follow certain regulations, but in their same world, you have to open that council and their classes and the subject up to white Americans to take these degrees, right? What happens in their world? First, you have white people wanting to opt into these subjects, no thank you, and wanting to take these subjects and also become hip-hoppers, right? On the other side, like imagine, right, this is like America is currently transitioning back into Confederate America because people are barely able to recognize racial differences, right? In their no thank you, I'll point you why. In that world that like struggles to distinguish racial identities and stuff, right? Under their world, when you academize it, there is lesser ability for individuals to call you out for that particular cultural appropriation because now they have degrees to show that they're good at it, right? The council isn't going to be racist because universities and academic institutions cannot be discriminatory towards races. That is in and of itself a principle that they have to uphold, right? So on the other side, whether you believe it or not, white people will opt in far more. They'll quantitatively grade you based on the struggles, and they're not going to be able to they're going to fare far better than the African Americans. No, thank you. But next, let me talk to you a little bit about how the job market is going to look like, because by virtue of their case, you have to make it far more accessible to white people, and they have failed to prove how that leads to better benefits that trickle down to African American individuals. Here's what the job market is going to look like. Firstly, recognizing that a lot of society right now favors white individuals. And what do I mean by this? In terms of perception of white individuals, in terms of how people like dreadlocks better on Kylie Jenner than they like it on a black woman, right? Like how a bindi looks better on Iggy Azalea than it does on an Indian woman, right? All of this recognizes one thing, that in that world, that side government is defending subpar individuals. So individuals that average in hip-hop are going to be far more able to get jobs than competent African Americans in their world, because there's social capital in their world, there are social structures to ensure that these benefits continue to trickle down to just white Americans and not African Americans. And that's what happens when you academize it. If I wanted to more harms, what?
Yeah, at first I don't understand. America moving towards Confederate issues, are they suddenly liberalizing because you're shifting your characterization left and right? And secondly, more education means you have less appropriation because you have understanding of it and you can still call them out for it.
Yeah, so appropriation isn't just monetizing of it, right? Appropriation is also taking someone's identity, putting it on yourself and making it white, right? Here's what's going to happen. Let me run you through the outcomes. First, when you whitewash hip-hop, a lot of white people are going to now be able to have degrees to show that they are hip-hop. Next, you have record labels that say are on the fence and are quite racist and don't want to hire African American individuals. They are now more have more ammunition to say that your degree is what I'm more inclined to buy over, say, an African American person who couldn't go to university and get that same degree, couldn't afford that particular education, right? In that world, you give white Americans far more privileges in terms of getting this. Also, in terms of the characterization that I talked to you earlier about how the African Americans will jump from club to club, right? Some of these clubs may end up being racist. Some of these clubs may not want the whole African American identity and all the passion and dirt that comes with that particular fervor, that comes with that particular identity. They might not want it in their clubs. And so it's very simple for our government's world to say, sure, let these clubs just ask for qualifications in hip hop, and based on the arbitrary metrics that they set on their side, they're going to favor the white Americans. Under their world, because by virtue, African Americans are underprivileged and don't have access to academic structures, especially tertiary academic structures, we don't think they empower African Americans. We do.
I'd like to thank the open speech. Now to start our proposing council and member of government.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a bit of comment. Like, I know that everyone's very excited in debate, but I come now.
Guys, I guess just need to sit down.
We wish to academize hip-hop in a way that goes beyond social misconceptions about hip-hop, that the hip-hop identity is only constrained to the African-American identity, because hip-hop at its core is something much more than just African-American identity. Hip-hop is something that should be its own subject, not just like something on the side of African-American culture. Hip-hop at its core is firstly a form of dancing. It's the form of dancing that comes the most natural to you. For example, if you clap or maybe if you bob your head, that's also what we call hip hop. Now, hip hop has, independent of African American culture, is also related to street culture, and hip hop is a form of like basic communication. We can talk to other people with the language of our bodies. Now, before I move on as to how and why we should academize hip hop, let's move on to some characterization of what academization is. So by academizing some subjects, we make sure that those subjects have to teach in a way that makes sure that it's very true to the reality at hand. And no facts could actually be misconstrued or anything be false. So for example, if you want to teach about hip-hop culture, then you just can't say that hip-hop culture is about this song or that song, but you must say that hip-hop culture includes these basic steps. So it has these regulatory bodies which will make sure that everything the students learn about hip-hop culture is right and there would be no misconceptions. Secondly is moving on how to grading, a form of academization, makes sure that students couldn't have any misconceptions, because when you grade, you make sure that these students know that these information correctly. And this differs greatly from teaching, because when you teach, but you don't test the students, then how could you make sure that what they learn is actually right? By having a structural system with schools and with like regulatory bodies to make sure that what they learn is actually right, we make sure that hip-hop is not misconstrued in any way. Now, I would like to move on as to how hip-hop radically is different from what it actually was first meant to be. Hip-hop is something independent of African-American culture. Hip-hop is related to the dancing culture in itself, because hip-hop is a form of basic dancing. And this form of basic dancing, the thing is, it is related to also other forms of dancing, because dancing, you have to have some basic steps to move on to more advanced steps. Thus, hip-hop can teach us more, not only about African-American culture, but also about the culture of other forms of dances, how they came to be, maybe flamenco or maybe other forms of dances that are innately connected to each other. Now, secondly, is moving on as to how this can have like a really good effect in school. No, thank you. So, hip-hop can be used instead of PE lessons, because simply most people would see dancing as a much like more approachable way and a much more fun way to actually work out. Since the thing is, maybe you don't want to do this all the time, but maybe you actually want something that is really fun. You can bob and clap your head too, you can listen to music, and you can learn about culture at the same time. And secondly, for people who were born with natural body conditions that limit themselves from being able to move as anybody else, or maybe move in a way that people usually like, they can actually have hip-hop lessons so that they can learn how to move their body more naturally, so that they could actually communicate with other people in a way that other people like and understand. Now, this leads us to how hip-hop actually helps us to have more social skills in life. And this is what education is essentially about. Education is about prepping students for their life later down the line. And for their life later down the line, they need what we call social skills. And these social skills, by having hip hop, which teaches us how to firstly have very natural hand figures so that we can communicate with other people more naturally. And secondly, about maybe imagine if you go to a club and if you can dance, then wouldn't you be the person who like gets more friends than normally anybody else, right? So hip hop helps us to give us like this new social group of friends and help us to move through life with a confidence that we usually wouldn't have if we don't have natural body movements or if we don't know how to move our bodies in the right way. And this hip hop also is something that comes naturally and basically to us. So thank you. Yes.
Okay, so like all your benefits are great, but they're not exclusive to hip hop in that you can also academize mainstream pop and accrue all these benefits because people buy into mainstream pop as well.
Okay, so I would like to first say that hip hop, the thing is, it's different from mainstream pop in the fact that it has firstly more cultural history, which, as I said before, is independent of African American culture, but we can't deny that African American culture is part of it. And this is partly what makes us more unique than other mainstream of pop music, is that we can also learn history at the same time as learning about natural body movements. And hip hop is also sometimes a much more basic form of dancing compared to mainstream pop. Mainstream pop includes maybe forms of like break dancing, and those things require great acrobatic abilities. However, hip hop is simply just clapping your hands and bobbing your head to it. So this would mean that teachers would have an easier time teaching students about hip hop, and students can actually learn more and learn easier and also learn faster. Which is why we're saying that we should academize hip hop simply because hip hop is not related just to countries who have racial conflicts. You can apply hip hop to anywhere in the world and it would still work. Because the thing is, hip hop is independent of African culture, African American culture. That means that even if in countries where you don't have African American, even in countries where you don't have racial conflicts, you can still teach hip hop simply as a natural way to move, a natural way to communicate with other people, and also a natural way to become more confident and to further your progress in life. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
I thank the member of the speech. Now to start from closing of the member of the
Thank you. With Tupac Shakur released his album premised on oppression and systemic persecution in African Americans, it was a message that was powerful, visceral, and uncensored. It was a message of a rebellious nature, one that said F the police, one that said that the government was not catering to African Americans on the ground. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the type of messages that the government can't condone in educational institutions. And insofar as OG wants to run away with this debate and claim all the benefits that he can get, insofar as they want to claim that it will be like super unfiltered, these are things that we would definitely contend in this debate. Hip-hop may not be only for African Americans, but the bastardization of hip-hop hurts African Americans, insofar as it's intrinsically tied to the very identity premised for African Americans. OG told you two things. One, they said that they can get an unfiltered, raw version of hip-hop, but this is also two, that they get better awareness, but like zero links as to why that was the case. Or told you, gave you a compelling idea about how it is the identity of African Americans on the ground. CJ told you that hip-hop is needed for social skills, right? A quick rebuttal later. CO entered this debate by giving you structural incentives for educational institutions to ensure a message and a curriculum that is as filtered and diluted as possible. Secondly, we'll tell you to extent how this necessarily means that the movement for African Americans, that the Black Lives Matter movement is necessarily compromised, and how that leads to a myriad of harms. I'll do like one very important thing in my speech, right? But before this, no, thank you. Some important rebuttal in terms of let's taking out CO in this debate. They told us two very important things. One, they said a misconception occurs and they can necessarily negate that misconception at the point at which they include hip-hop in academia. One reason why we think this is incredibly not, like, this is bad, right? We're going to flip this. We think that at the point at which you are able to redefine hip-hop, we think that the misconception that exists under status quo is incredibly good, because it means that the people on the ground, for instance, people who have undergone that oppression, people who have messages to send, people who undergone systematic persecution by government, for instance, are able to also define what hip-hop narratives mean.
At the point in which you necessarily mean that the government monopolizes as to the craft narrative as to what hip-hop necessarily means, it's precisely when these people lose the ability to necessarily do something. But the second thing they said is that like, they get more skills from hip-hop, right? Two reasons why. Why it's not important. One is just, there's just no reason that they can't get this on the outside. Because then that also applies to levels who will go with friends and have social skills, right? Who doesn't has like most important balance about friends having things, right? So why am I talking about African American movement? You have to understand that is that based on hip-hop movement necessarily originated. Two things. One, understand that the hip-hop movement originated from a message of protest. This is a message of police brutality, like MIDP. But two also that the hip-hop movement originated from a message of realism. This means that inside the West Side rivalry stories, Tupac and Biggie necessarily like what wars, conflicts in those particular places, ladies and gentlemen. What happens when you academize these particular subjects that are very, very controversial? Understand that we have to look at the incentive structures of educational institutions. What do we think happens? Three things. One, it becomes filtered. We give you three structural reasons why. One, understand that there's census to cater to children and adolescents who necessarily opt into these particular courses. They probably can't teach F the police because like they don't want children to be exposed to these particular messages. But two, the council of like whatever they invented in their side of the house is also, is also accountable to bigger censorship bodies, which necessarily mean that even if their side of the house, the council wants to portray as the police, the bigger censorship body which wants to cater to children not exposed to those things is likely to overpower the council. It means that they are far less likely to get an unfiltered form of message. But thirdly, we also think that I said that already, okay. But B, I think that also, insofar as the education institution has incentives to ensure that its curricula is popular, we think that's incredibly bad. No, thank you. One, the university's curricula is far more likely to include messages which do not represent what African Americans face on the ground. These are idols such as Iggy Azalea, for instance, idols such as Drake, who don't necessarily face the systemic persecution African Americans face. But two, also at the point at which schools impose curricula, they are far more likely to input value-neutral messages, such as like very politically neutral messages like Black Eyed Peas, as opposed to Tupac Shakur's F the police. These are things that you can't teach in schools. You're far more likely to opt into the very easy forms of hip-hop that you want to portray. But thirdly, thank you, understand that the point at which you grade hip-hop, when you necessarily dictate that there is a good kind of hip-hop and a bad kind of hip-hop, that's when you necessarily delineate the lines between what is good and what is bad. That's when you define bad as like a particular set of things. And understand that as a government, understand that as a school, you have incentives to define what is bad as something that is rebellious, something that is violent, something that is hateful, and what is good as something that is peaceful. The problem is, what is bad, what is violent, is literally what led to the African movement to be able to lobby for rights, that led to the systemic persecution of African Americans in the first place. No, thank you. What do I mean by this, right? The kinds of hip-hop being taught will be diluted and it's not rebellious, not violent. So, why is this extension incredibly important? Two reasons why we'll pause it. One, understand that, so OG gave you some analysis on identity. We're going to tell you how the movement benefits from this particular circumstance, right? So understand that the Black Lives Matter movement draws its power from hip-hop. Insofar as the Black Lives Matter movement is marginalized under status quo, it does draw power from the ability of hip-hop rappers, for instance, and African-American rappers, to necessarily instigate their own messages in hip-hop to appeal to broader society. This means that what happens at a point in which you allow an unfiltered version to dominate? Two things. One, you draw legitimate views of people who had undergone the prosecution. These are individuals on the ground who still face poverty, for instance, but you're far more likely to include like the respected African-American dude who will necessarily dictate his own personal agendas. But two, the sort of message that you actually institute is one that's not representative of actual ills. That means you don't stress on police brutality for all the reasons that I say. I'll take you in a bit. The comparative is African-Americans who do undergo oppression are able to still tap into that message and craft what the Black Lives Matter movement means for themselves. We think that's incredibly important. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't understand why you're just attacking policies and nitpicking, right? I already told you this will be a counselor. I think it's completely fine for us to teach certain things to high school and to college students. I don't understand what's the link there.
Okay, I literally gave you structural reasons why that won't necessarily be the case. We think it's perfectly fine to assume that the sort of teaching and sort of education that will be rendered is one that is incredibly whitewashed. You have to deal with that. You never preempted it. Deal with it. So, why is this incredibly important? Secondly, understand that governments at the point at which they have a monopoly to necessarily craft what hip-hop means to individuals, that's precisely at the point at which they are far more likely to paint rebellious as bad and peaceful as good, right? Why is this incredibly important?
This for a vast majority of reasons, right? It means that you have far less sympathy for people and that you do have to convince, right? It means that you get far more white paranoia at the point at which white people on the ground feel as if the violent and oppressed and violent hip hop is bad and peaceful hip hop is good. That's when when they hear hip hop music on the street, for instance, that is violent, that is after the police, they feel that that's a form of government oppression, government rebellion. We think that's incredibly important because the cooperativist governments don't have the power of monopoly to necessarily dictate what it means to individuals. This is incredibly important insofar as the Black Lives Movement wants to necessarily paint a picture that the government is oppressing them, ladies and gentlemen. Understand that CO, as government whip, has to deal with this. We are the only side that materializes a world where the Black Lives Matter movement is able to progress, where the Black Lives Matter movement is able to necessarily dictate its aims and dictate its goals. So proud to boast.
I thank the member of the speech. Now to welcome the government here in the government.
The entire debate up to this point has been relatively narrow, only focusing on the aspect of African American culture with regards to hip-hop. But as closing opposition, we believe that hip-hop is not just African American culture. We agree with what opening government said about how African American culture needs to be propagated to foster a culture of understanding. But this is not nearly all of what hip-hop is. Hip-hop isn't just African American culture either. It's just world culture, human culture, and all of this is what our member of government tried to say. And basically, what hip-hop, what we really have to look at here in this debate about academizing hip-hop is education and what hip-hop is. Hip-hop at its core is a basic form of dance. It's a form of dance. It's a way for people to convey themselves. It's a way for people to communicate. And hip-hop is not just for African Americans, and it's not just related to the bad name that it has. It is not just related to F the police or whatever that the African American culture carries about it. And even for your point about why we can't just teach mainstream pop, hip-hop is not just mainstream pop. Mainstream pop is the deviation of hip-hop. All of the music nowadays, it comes partly, at least, from hip-hop, and that is where all of this came from. So by academizing hip-hop as a subject, that literally cannot be replaced by just any common history lessons or just a course or two about hip-hop. We are not just teaching students tolerance, we are also preparing them for life, not just academically and emotionally, but also socially. And that is what we, as opposing government, are saying. We also wish to not bastardize hip-hop, as the opposition has stated, is a very dangerous thing to do, and we definitely agree with this. What we are just saying is that we are not teaching hip-hop as something oversimplified. We are not teaching it as a kiddie dance move. We're teaching it as a culture. We are teaching it as a form of communication. We're teaching it as a thing that's part PE, part history, and part a lot of other things as well. So in terms of and history lessons, mainstream pop, it cannot foster all of this. Other dance forms such as ballet also cannot foster all of this. So first of all, for the house of debate of hip hop in school, so versus subjects such as physical education, we are teaching students control over their body, how to live healthily. Students need to foster a healthy life now and also into the future. And this cannot be done with just talking about African Americans. And even in that, hip-hop fosters culture and history that is not just African American. As we stated before, it is a basic dance move that incorporates something from all of us, from all cultures. It's very natural for us humans to bounce along or just naturally dance along to music or when we are happy. So just the culture of it incorporates so much from so much more than just African American. It is what all of us are made of. This one thing that can bring all of us together and therefore fosters understanding in every aspect of life and not just in terms of tolerance and racism. So there we would erase the misconceptions about African American culture, and we would also foster tolerance for many other cultures as well. And finally, it's for social. Once again, as we stated, our main goal is to fulfill the purpose of education, which is to prepare students for life. And that is not just academically, it's also socially. And hip hop, as a basic dance form, can perform this. So of course there is the racism part about how students can better learn to appreciate other cultures and stop the intolerance that goes on in countries such as the United States. But then also just basically, hip hop is for communication, and we ready students for life and for what is out there. So in schools, in order to prepare students, yes, I understand that I can talk to my friends, play with them, and that's enough social life for me. But really, real social life is a lot more difficult than just that. Not everyone at school, once again, we cannot all find a common ground to be able to dance or anything. Even in music or just normal things such as what you like to play, it wouldn't be possible to find a common ground for all of us. I like classical music, none of my friends like classical music, but when we dance for something as basic as hip-hop, all of us can appreciate it, and even the really antisocial human beings such as myself can find friends through something that goes back to our roots as humans and something that can bring us all together easily. And that would well portray the purpose of school, which is to prepare students for life. So I apologize for running what seems like a sort of parallel case here, but hip-hop is seriously not just African American culture. It's really so much more than that. And African American culture, fostering understanding and no racism, is really just a part of that. It's maybe a big part, but it's definitely not all of it, and definitely not mutually not exclusive as well. We can easily foster understanding for African Americans and their culture in a course or two in history at school. But teaching hip hop as a subject in itself is more than that. It would perform more than that, and teaching it like this would be irreplaceable by any other subject, not even history or cultural studies or anything like that. And therefore, at Clothing Government, we believe that in order to fulfill the students' life and to prepare students for the future and improve academics, hip-hop should be academized. Thank you.
I thank the government for the speech. Now we come to the debate of the
I think it's really sad that my partner's extension was not adequately dealt with in the closing side. I think the extension we brought about was unique as to how movements fighting for Black lives and for Black social issues need this weapon, need to have the dictate over how hip hop actually should be, right? And so long as they manage to control the narrative as to how hip hop should be, they're the ones who best benefit their communities as opposed to academizing a subject that they could otherwise use for better things, right? I'm going to prove to you two things in my speech. Firstly, I'm going to going to tell you exactly why status quo is a better alternative to catering to certain movements, based off the extension that my partner brought about. I'll do a bit of a comparison. Secondly, I'm going to tell you exactly on which side we preserve the true nature of hip-hop better and why it's important, right? So a few things. One, the first issue, they tried to tell us that status quo doesn't necessarily cater to a lot of these communities, right? And that's why we need to have certain changes. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to understand a few things. One, we know that status quo, if we choose to stick to status quo, it means that the narrative of hip-hop will be controlled by certain communities, right? And the communities that need it the most are usually communities that are fighting for changes within African American communities, like people who need hip-hop as a power to bring in change, which is why some of the most effective methods of like actually understanding black problems is to look and listen to, for example, rappers who constantly talk about issues, right? So look and listen to people like Lil Wayne, who's an active member of BLM, and he constantly propagates in favor of African American people. I don't understand their case where they think they can get all this benefits at the point in which they absolutely academize this, right? We've given you structural reasons as to how how filters would exist even in their world. But a few things, right? We need to understand that the point in which we allow hip hop to stay within this, I'll take you later. The point in which we allow hip hop to stay within these communities, these are the structural benefits we get. One, we need to understand that this is arguably the best way to reflect on their pains and suffering. The point in which hip-hop is raw, uncensored, this is the best way in which people can understand what you've been through. What does this necessarily entail? One, because this is the form of hip-hop that most people would want to necessarily listen to, we have the advantage of numbers. We have the advantage of more people actually wanting to listen to this, right? We have other poorer African-American communities listening. We have the international community listening because this is a form of music that shows the kinds of oppression that your state does to you. Sit down, right? This is a unique benefit that we have on our side because with numbers comes more pressure, both locally and internationally, right? Hip-hop can actually be a powerful tool these movements can use to bring in change for their communities. If they're trying to say that the same benefit exists under their side, point in which one, this is no longer a unique benefit that these movements have, but literally everyone has access to this, at the point in which this weapon is so layered, so filtered to the point in which the actual message of hip-hop, the actual raw uncensorship part of hip-hop no longer exists. We think that one, this significantly lowers the fight that these movements have, given that this weapon is out of their hands. Secondly, we take away all the numbers that would have otherwise listened to hip-hop because of the factor that it is uncensored, it is raw, it is not catering to everyone's safe spaces or whatnot, right? That's the kind of hip-hop people want. That's the kind of hip-hop that will actually garner attention and numbers. With those numbers, we can implement change. An extension coming from Khalis that wasn't dealt with, right? Rather, we got a whole lot of why hip-hop is a good dancing thing, which I agree. Anyways, second argument, right? Oh yeah, before that, go on.
Yeah, so I agree with you 100%. It's because of these issues, it's because of the controversy that's why hip-hop is one that's extremely loved, right? So then it's a contradiction in a sense, right? Because then all the economic benefits that white people are getting taking over hip-hop falls on open hop, and all your benefits of whitewashing hip-hop also falls because no one has interest in it.
Time's up. I know, look. In your case, when you're talking about that all these benefits exist on your side, firstly, right, we're going to give you structural reasons as to how these are uniquely our benefits and how you don't get them in academizing hip-hop, right? Stop being too soft, right? So secondly, right, under which side do we actually under which side do we preserve the true nature of hip-hop, right? Something they're trying to run away from. One, assuming these councils even exist, right? They gave us a characterization that most rappers who have anti-state rap videos, for example, F the police, things like that, these people get shut down almost immediately. You know what this definitely entails, right? One, this entails that the same state that controls these people and constantly oppresses them and jails them is the same state that actually controls education systems, right? So the kinds of raps that you would be allowed to teach are obviously raps that are firstly so neutral with what side of the political spectrum they're on. Sit down. And these are raps that are so deviant of the actual suffering that these people have, because states would have an inherent incentive to ensure that one, these raps that now exist in colleges and universities are really censored and are pro-state, and that is a big thing we're trying to take on our side, right? The point in which we don't allow states to have this unique benefit. They can't dictate what kind of messages will be allowed in rap. I don't care if you're going to say that. No, African Americans will teach this, right? People who've been in the industry will teach this. The point in which it's the state controlling the kinds of messages that will be allowed, the harms that we said will still exist on your side. One, filtering will still exist, right? The best case scenario, you'll have African American teachers, sure. But I think that at the point in which they've arrested so many rappers who make anti-state music videos, the kinds of music that will exist within these colleges and universities will definitely be very, very pro-state. Sit down, both of you, right? So what does this necessarily entail? One, what are the unique benefits that they're trying to fight for? Things like awareness. Awareness just won't happen, right? One, because the kinds of, the kinds of awareness that you're going to get under your side is just one that is too censored. Second, it's one that shows the state is a good actor, right? It's one that shows that the state is not one that constantly oppresses these communities. Because if it's always been in the state's interest to like arrest all of these rappers who constantly fight against the state, they're going to make sure that those rhetoric no longer stay within like these communities, right? So the kinds of hip-hop that they're going to allow is obviously one in which the inherent message of hip-hop is taken away. Khalis has properly characterized to you what hip-hop actually is. It's a voice sit down. It's a voice to it's a voice for effective kinds of protest, right? It is an avenue for you to voice out against the oppressions that you've been facing. The point in which the same state that has oppressed so many of these individuals gets to dictate the kinds of narratives that will be allowed in public education systems is not the point in which you will have you will garner a lot of awareness, because the kinds of issues they're fighting for will be drowned out by a state that constantly oppresses them. Secondly, the true nature of hip-hop, which is to always be rebellious, to have like to voice out against like societal oppression and things like that, will not be retained, right? So I don't care what kind of censored hip-hop you're trying to make available to everyone, right? The point in which it comes at the cost of these people having their messages drowned out, we don't think any objective benefit you're trying to propagate matters, right? Because what's the best case scenario that's coming on that side, right? More people will be aware of hip-hop. Ladies and gentlemen, we already told you the true nature of hip-hop and why people need to be aware of that instead. Secondly, we just have the rap industry, right? We know what hip-hop necessarily stands for. We don't need them to teach us an alternate version of hip-hop that is absolutely censored and just doesn't bring up any of these issues that these people have been suffering. What have we proven to you today? One, we've told you the true nature of rap and why it must stay in order for like these movements to fight an effective fight. Secondly, we've told you exactly how retaining the true identity of hip-hop actually allows most of these people to retain their identities as rappers. But secondly, it allows us to understand true awareness of these issues and so on and so forth. For all those reasons, proud to propose.
I thank all of you for the speech. You may prosper, shake hands, and then we don't